Be here now. Just be here now.
Welcome to the Set and Setting podcast with Madison Margolin. As a journalist, Madison has spent years exploring the intersection of psychedelics, cannabis, and culture. This podcast brings together thought leaders from today's psychedelic renaissance to talk about the role of psychedelics in our inner and outer lives. You can support this podcast and find additional resources at BeHereNowNetwork.com/Madison.
Hi, my name is Madison Margolin, and I am the host of Set and Setting. I'm also a journalist, and I cover cannabis, psychedelics, and religion. I co-founded a psychedelic magazine called DoubleBlind, as well as the first ever Jewish Psychedelic Summit, and I've been freelancing for a number of publications, including Rolling Stone, Tablet, Vice, High Times, Playboy, and more. So you're probably wondering how I got onto this beat. You could say that I grew up in a very psychedelic household. Both my parents are children of the 60s and 70s. My father actually ended up in India with a guru named Karli Baba or Maharaji, who was the same guru that Ram Dass had. And so my dad and Ram Dass became friends since my dad was in India in the early 70s. And so I grew up in a community in the satsang of people who've had their own psychedelic experiences and really used that as a jumping off point to explore what spirituality means. That's kind of how I got into it personally, always wondering what was it that people were not accessing in the religions of their birth that they were finding instead in far off places like India. So that's some of the things that I want to explore in the Set and Setting podcast. We talk about how psychedelics inform spirituality, where we're at in psychedelic culture today, what the word psychedelic even means, and how to have a psychedelic experience and a psychedelic lifestyle with or without the substances themselves. So my first interview is with Justin Boreta. He's a musician in the electronic band The Glitch Mob, and we talk about how music guides a psychedelic journey. Hope you enjoy, and it's a pleasure to meet everybody here and to be here for the ride. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Set and Setting podcast. We have with us today Justin Boreta. Many music fans know Justin as a member of The Glitch Mob, a beat-driven electronic group that has been touring for more than a decade. Since their establishment in 2006, the electronic live act has now performed around the world at festivals including Coachella, Burning Man, Lollapalooza, and more. Boreta has collaborated with the spiritual teacher Ram Dass and Alan Watts on guided meditations with his Grammy-nominated ambient project, Superposition. Justin, I'm really excited to have you here.
Hey, Madison.
So,
thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. I met Justin, I guess, through DoubleBlind and sort of the psychedelic journalism beat and scene. And, Justin, why don't you start with just how you got into this space, right? What was your journey through the Glitch Mob? Also, where psychedelics kind of came into play for you, and of course, that's tangential to Ram Dass's teachings as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was actually just thinking about how we initially connected, and it was because I was reading DoubleBlind, and I just have to say that I'm a huge fan. I'm like your number one fan. I've given subscriptions to people. I've given issues to people. I've sent the articles around for my friends that want to know how just get good information that's not too academic or too woo. It's just I really love what you're doing so much, and I'm such a fan and supporter. So I'm just really excited to be here with everything that you're up to. And when I released the Ram Dass piece, Imagine, the first meditation in 2018, that had been a long culmination of me trying to figure out how to weave my psychedelic spiritual practice into music. So like Glitch Mob is dance music, and I felt like I had compartmentalized this into being, this is dance music and this is my secret psychedelic spiritual practice. But I had been really into meditation. I started doing transcendental meditation and had spent plenty of time with recreational psychedelic use. But right around that time, I went to meditation retreat and got into ayahuasca ceremonies. And so I just really connected with the intentional container of that. And that all dovetailed at the same time with getting into Vipassana meditation. And for me, it was really the combination of meditation and psychedelic that completely changed everything for me. So there's a number of years there where I didn't really talk about it in public. There was no one was really doing what you guys were doing. Musicians didn't really talk about it too much. And it was obviously people were having conversations about this backstage or with other artists, and it would be in the music. And it was a little more like Hunter S. Thompson style, have some crazy story about taking acid in Vegas and something happening. But when it comes to the more therapeutic use of it, it was really the Michael Pollan book in that moment around when he started talking about this publicly, and it's just in the way that he does and everything that was happening at the time, I decided to really start talking about this publicly. And the Ram Dass piece for me was actually the way that I was talking about it, so to speak. So I had a couple really life-changing, incredible psilocybin experiences by myself. I didn't know any therapists or any underground communities or anything. I just cobbled together my own solo high-dose therapy session with a eye mask and music and started doing this. And then I discovered the power of music with this and how my own voice fit into it. And then I also rediscovered Ram Dass. Like I had his books around and I had read Be Here Now and I had a couple of other books, and I actually thought they were a little fluffy for me. There's something like woo-woo about it. And he used the word God a lot, and I just didn't connect because I come from a more of like an atheist backdrop. I didn't have a particularly religious household, but I had a moment where that all changed for me. And I was like, wait, what was that? And I picked up, it was Polishing the Mirror, one of his books. And it felt like a map of like this crystal clear map of what had just happened to me, which I couldn't make heads or tails of. I was like, wait, was that God that I was talking to? I don't know. I was so confused. And so it really helped me make sense of the whole experience. So then I thought that I wanted to make some music so that other people out there that might be having these experiences could find their ways back down into Ram Dass, which was very meaningful for me.
So I am a total nerd about sort of the overlap or the intersection between psychedelic experience and religious experience, or spiritual, mystical, whatever type of word you want to use. So can you kind of go into more detail about that moment where, you said coming from an atheistic background, when you're grappling via psychedelics or even just via the teachings of Ram Dass or other spiritual leaders, and you encounter, I don't want to use the word God, but you encounter something that challenges the beliefs of atheism. Like what was that like for you? Just go into more detail.
Yeah, it was fascinating because I didn't spend a lot of time reading about mysticism at the time. I was really into meditation, but like very specifically around concentration and mindfulness. Like I didn't really go too deep into Buddhism and unpack the layers. So for me, I didn't have a lot of language. I had read Terence McKenna and everything, but I would say that I didn't really have a huge lexicon or a very deep or nuanced understanding of what a mystical experience was like. It wasn't until I had it, and then later in time, I was like, oh, okay, that's what that was. But I had a high dose mushroom journey with music that some of the music I had created, it curated, and speakers in a cabin in nature. And for the first time, I went more or less, I had a complete ego loss experience where I went completely offline and had what felt like the best way to describe it is like a conversation where there was a benevolent voice, which was represented as a feminine entity to me, was speaking through me and to me and telling me these universal truths. But it wasn't a conversation in the sense of that there's me, there's Justin, the subject, and then someone else, which like in ayahuasca, you can have these sort of like dialogues. It wasn't that. I was completely gone. And in fact, I came out of it like, whoa, what was that? And I just started like cry laughing, going, what just happened? Because I felt like I had died and gone somewhere and then came back feeling really refreshed. And especially coming from an atheistic background where I was certain that there was no God, and that I was much more of like a materialist, I guess. But really just because I hadn't thought about it too much. I wasn't like not from a scientific standpoint or anything. That's just what made sense to me. So it completely changed everything for me. I mean, there's a lot that led up to it, but I don't think I also would have gotten there without the meditation training, because it allowed me to go into these deeper and deeper psilocybin sessions with the meditation practice of a rudder. And it wasn't until later in time that I've since have had experiences with guides and more ceremonies and stuff like this. But it was really a solo journey to a place that I didn't really intend to go.
Mm-hmm. And where are you holding now in the kind of God atheist belief system?
To me, it's all really funny now to even look back and think and read my old journals and think that I had some certainty, because I think the deeper that we go into these states and experiences, the more I realize I don't know anything, or whether it's God or whether it's me or it's just the animating life force. So it's the same thing that makes the stars twinkle. I feel more in awe, and I feel very grateful now to even get to have these experiences. And it's fun to wonder, and it's less fun to be really certain about stuff.
Yeah. There's like a phrase, the more you know you don't know, I think is relevant here.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, you also mentioned something about kind of combining a psychedelic experience with meditation, and you often hear, and even through Ram Dass's own story, like meditation, if you really have a cultivated practice, can kind of help you get to the same place, so to speak, that psychedelics are the shortcut to. But of course, then putting them in combination is a whole other story and a whole other type of psychedelic experience. So how did you kind of get to wanting to meditate on psychedelics, and how does that feel different from, a regular psychedelic experience or a regular meditation experience? And, what's that like for you?
I had before my meditation experience, I had a number of psychedelic experiences recreationally. Some of them were amazing and some of them were awful. And it didn't really seem like I could control that. Sometimes I would be in the most beautiful place in nature and I would have some psychedelics with friends and I would go off into terror land. Or sometimes I would be in this really awful like warehouse party somewhere in San Francisco and I have a beautiful time. And there didn't really seem to be any rhyme or reason to it. So that was when I actually stopped doing psychedelics recreationally at all after a couple really difficult trips. And I still haven't. I will microdose, but I don't, if I'm going to a festival, if I'm going camping or something, I don't really do that. I really save it for a really more therapeutic setting, controlled setting. That really works for me, or a ceremony. But the way I arrived there was I went on a 10-day silent retreat and I felt so present, and my emotions and my internal state, my internal monologue felt as aware of everything that was happening as I ever have, that I thought it would be a good time to go back in and visit these states with this newfound sense of like directionality. So I basically, right after I got out of my 10-day retreat, I didn't plan this, but I decided like, I'm going to go do this session, which is when this happened. And it felt like an entirely different thing. It was even different than just doing a solo retreat without any meditation practice. It felt like if you're playing a video game, that like the meditation allowed me to grab the Xbox controller and just navigate through the experience and then notice. It's like so easy to get caught in spirals of whatever that comes up. It can be guilt, it can be shame, it can be overthinking, it can be just focusing on stuff that I was able to come back and just let the experience happen. And through that, I felt like it just seems like a rudder where I could really just navigate through it. And so for me, the combination of those two things is what led to all of this stuff happening, where it's like not like going into a deep psychedelic experience. I also don't think that meditating all the way through it is necessarily a good thing, in the sense that like you can have a practice where you could really just stay there in it and focus on one thing, or focus on the candle, right, or my breath, and that can actually, I think that can help. It can help focus the experience. But for me, it felt like navigation controls for the internal states. And I would notice, like in a normal psychedelic experience, maybe if something difficult starts to come up, it can overtake you. Then I would be able to take a deep breath, meditate within the trip, and think, oh, wow, that's really difficult. Now I'm just going to come back to my breath here. And that like every time I would do that, the experience would unfold even more. It was almost like the mystical field would respond to this kind of gentle humility and focus and presence.
What is it? Do you find that it's, for you, what is meditation, right? Like, so many people say like when they're meditating, the idea is just to like try to clear out the mind. Like, is that a goal for you during meditation, or is it more like, just quieting and then like allowing things to come in? And is it easier to do that with a psychedelic?
For me, it's really about present time awareness and being aware of whatever it is that happens to be happening. And then I think of like mindfulness, of being able to concentrate on one particular thing. I think it's actually harder to meditate on psychedelics because it takes extra levels of concentration. Like when I get up in the morning every day, I'd have meditate 20 minutes in the morning. I don't ever really sit down and go, okay, this is going to be hard. But when you're on a really high dose of something, it can be hard to even sit up straight. So it takes some extra energy, but it really it strengthens the muscles. Mm-hmm. I always think of when people are, say you're a marathon runner and then you go practice at high altitudes. So when you come back down, you take the weight off and all of a sudden everything feels different. I think it's kind of like that.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good metaphor. So, one thing I also wanted to get into, especially given your music and musicianship, is kind of music as flow state, right? And I think I've even had moments, especially when I first got into hula hooping back in college, I would, glitch mob was a big thing where I was at Berkeley and I lived in this crazy of psychedelic co-op, and, we'd have, electronic music parties and big backyard, and I'd be hooping. And I realized, through certain types of music, like I said, glitch mob included, but also others, that in combination with the hula hoop was just this flow state, like embodied, that I'd never experienced before. And it's really been my rock, my solid thing, kind of taking me through like the next decade, honestly, since I discovered it. So, what is the process for you of kind of creating music, and how does that, does that engender for you a type of flow state, or what is it like in regard also to, this kind of be here now sort of presence?
Mm-hmm. Hula hooping, I think, is such a good example of something that can help you get into flow states. I mean, I haven't spent a ton of time with it, but there's this Goldilocks zone of something that's just hard enough, not too hard, that when you get that challenge, or I think like mountain biking, right, where it's like, for the most part, if you're biking down a really steep hill, so there's a little bit of fear there's a little bit of challenge. It's not like if you're riding up the hill straight up, it's really hard to get into those states. And so music and creativity is really part of that same conversation. And a lot of the best ideas in music come from flow states. So it's something that, especially like when we're writing music in the world of the glitch mob, and the ambient stuff as well, the really good ideas that are outside of the box of where you expect something to go come from those states of sort of like non-judgmental presence. So it all kind of mushes together in the same thing. And I think of I think of that level of presence of setting up myself to be able to get into those states. So it's like removing distractions, um, doing things that I know are going to creatively challenge me and are going to be connected to a higher purpose, and that this is music. This is something that I really speaks to me and I'm really excited about. That's another really, that's a thing too. Cause you could be writing a really, like a really exciting email or something like that. But if it doesn't, if it, I do think that, writing is another piece of this as well. But if it connects to something that is really truly meaningful to you, I think it's a lot easier to get into flow states. And the overlap with music I feel like that's what I really live for, is to find different ways to use music to get into flow, whether it's with sort of the psychedelic spirituality thing or whether it's playing music, is probably the time that I get into flows the most. Producing music goes back and forth. It can be really analytical and then it can be really creative. Sometimes we're playing, but when I'm on stage performing, especially certainly with other artists, jamming and having that sort of musical conversation, that's when I feel like the deepest flows really happen for me.
And when you're making music, are you doing that with the idea that a lot of people who are listening to it might be under the influence of a psychedelic? Like, do you see your music as psychedelic music?
I think that
or inspired by psychedelic states, I should say also.
Absolutely. Yes. The short answer is yes. And that all of the music that I've made or put out and been involved in has some sort of sensitivity to that. There's a lot of different things that you can do, but especially when I moved from being someone who was going to festivals and going to a lot of shows, and I grew up in Southern California or San Francisco, I would be going to raves. For me, it was really rave culture and DJ and punk rock shows that I was in the crowd. And there was a very conscious shift into being the performer on stage. And so I think I take that very seriously in the sense that I've been in the crowd and have an artist take me on a journey. And there's something about the sensitivity to what people could be going through, or I think of it a lot as the narrative of the music, that for those 90 minutes or for that hour, you're taken on a journey. And obviously dance music can be one thing that you can do with these experiences. And then the sort of focused sound bath, ambient listening thing is different. And psychedelics and meditation have shaped so much of who I am and who all of these, all my collaborators, it's all part of the discussion and the sort of like the subterranean context. So I don't think it's really possible to make anything that doesn't really come from that state, but it is certainly part of the experience a lot. And like we just went out to Utah, and Glitch Mob did like that was about 2 weeks ago now, and we were writing our 4th album out there. And we met up with our friend with East Forest, who lives out there in Utah, and he took us around, and we were just connecting with nature and taking all of that energy, having our microdoses hikes, and putting all of that energy back into the music. I think there's a special type of honesty that comes through with music that taps into psychedelics. So some people love jazz, some people don't like jazz, some people love fish, some people hate fish. I think it's more about like the honesty of what music is really saying, that doesn't feel like it's so easy to get into manufacturing music for algorithms, or thinking of music or art as a product. To me, it's really the stuff that comes from a true, gritty, honest story that holds the dark and the light and the complexity all at once. That works with that state.
It really resonates what you're saying. And I've been thinking about this because I just was taken to a fish concert, And I just, I was texting a friend from the concert and I said, like, no amount of acid is going to make this music make sense. So I'm not a fan, but I do like Fish people. And if you really compare Fish to like the Dead, and this sort of like jam band, whatever, and you're talking about containing complexity and multitudes and meaning, I think there's so much that comes from, whether it's through the lyrics or even through like the musicianship itself, especially when you're talking about music that doesn't contain lyrics at all. But another thing I wanted to ask you is, we've gone over this, I think, when, in collaboration, when you collaborated with DoubleBlind, we featured one of your playlists, like a playlist made for the psychedelic experience. And so I thought you could share with the audience here, how is it that you go about a process of creating meaning, creating an experience through a musical journey, whether it's a playlist or a song or an album or whatever?
I think that music that comes from that place, everyone who's ever done art knows that when it's coming from this deep flow place, it's coming from a place of presence, or maybe you're processing something. Maybe you feel sad about whatever is happening in your life, or you feel all of the complexity of the world, and you're really using that music that really if it speaks to you on that deep level, I think it will speak to other people. And specifically when it comes to psychedelic playlists are really interesting, because I think that was a mushroom duration playlist, right? It was like roughly 6 hours long, where there's sort of like a slow ramp up and then a couple of dips and peaks that go up and down, some peaks and valleys, and then it sails back on again, which is based on the rough arc of the Johns Hopkins playlist, which is like mostly like classical music. And I sort of use that same arc to think about it, but I try to get music that has some kind of duality in it, and there may be more or less directionality. Like some ambient music might sound like very dull when you're listening sober, but if you listen focused, in a focused state, it can really open up and flower. I like to think of music that holds the listener through a process where there's, like, even if there is something that is being processed or there's melancholy there, the music still is there to hold you. And obviously, in a psychedelic session, playlists are interesting because different people feel different ways about different types of music. And a certain playlist might be really intense for someone else, and it might be really bland for someone else. So I try to think of making music like this is more of a place than a narrative. So like the glitch mob music has a very particular emotion or a feeling, and it's like a ton of bite there. It's like really intense. The emotion is really, really high, and we're trying to like grab you by the lapel, grab the listener by the lapel, and tell the story, take you on a journey, like almost like in an Indiana Jones fashion. Whereas with the ambient stuff, and I say ambient even for lack of a better term, I don't actually really think a lot of this music is technically ambient. I think of that with like less directionality, but it's an honest place that you go, or like each song is a little world, and then when you string them together, they create other little micro worlds and micro journeys. And I also think of music visually a lot of times. Like there's a lot of talk in the studio around textures and forms and colors. Like a song can feel monochromatic. It can feel very colorful or bright or fiery or cold and icy and Arctic. So I think of intentionally linking those things together. So when I create a playlist, it will move between worlds of emotion so that it can help you move through things.
That's a very psychedelic approach, and the sort of the synesthesia or synesthesiastic. I don't know how to turn that into an adjective here. But, when you're combining like the sensory sound and sight seeing sounds, hearing colors, whatever. And to think of the music that you create in that way, I think that just kind of blew my mind a little bit. But another question I had was what kind of music do you personally like to listen to for your own psychedelic journeys?
So that playlist that I created for DoubleBlind actually is one that it's based on one that I've done a lot of journey work with. Although I would probably have the peaks go a little bit more intense at times. So that one I would say is a little more muted. And if people wanted to take that and edit it, you could drop in some more intense songs there in the middle. But I like music that's really organic, in the sense that I don't want anything that's super, super digital feeling. I think there's even electronic music can have a very sort of warm organicness to it. But I also like music that, when I say like spatial or immersive, it's almost like a place that you go, or if you close your eyes and put your headphones on, you can feel like you are somewhere, but there's not too much narrative that's grafted on. So for instance, like a movie soundtrack, a soundtrack to a trailer is the example of something that I typically don't like, because there's this emotional train that you're riding. And some people really like to put certain like movie theme songs in there, but it turns on the conceptual mind and it takes me to something that's like a cinematic location, or even language in general. Sometimes I'll have Sigur Rós tracks in there, or East Forest, or a lot of music from South America, which has languages that I don't personally understand, which obviously I think Ikodos, like for me, I don't speak these languages. So it doesn't turn on my mind. That puts me in a time and place where I am now thinking of where this might be. So there's an interesting example of this, but when I was first venturing into making my own psychedelic therapy music, I gathered a bunch of albums from my friends. I was like, hey, I wrote probably 10 of my different friends, and I was like, send me your favorite tripping album, just one of them. And I took the whole thing. I took out a bunch of selections from there, and I just listened through on a relatively high dose. And there are certain things that I just loved, and there are certain things that I thought were awful. And it was really funny just to get up, hit next on iTunes. But the moment I realized this was that someone had sent me an album that had this beautiful ambient album that I loved when I was sober, that had field recordings of, was clearly Japan. You could hear like a subway in Japanese, like a subway announcer, some sort of like cityscape. It was a beautiful textural song. It sounded like there was kids playing. So someone was wandering around Tokyo or something and recording. And in that moment, I felt like I zoomed to Tokyo. All of a sudden I was out of where I was, and I'm like in a movie in Japan. And it really, even though it's beautiful and it was really like delightful to listen to it, I take those sorts of things out that allow you to have your own experience and not have the music be too specific with the time and place, because it's so much better to get lost. I guess that's sort of the same reason why, but I don't typically go watch movies on psychedelics either, but I know some people really like that.
Right. Well, it kind of inserts a narrative into your experience that's, priming you for sort of like a type of like emotional curation almost, right? You feel sad, and now
Yes.
this is kind of happening, or this sound is occurring, and so that's supposed to evoke sadness or excitement or whatever. One question I had also was, you mentioned something about organic sounding music, even if it is electronic. And I just was wondering if you had an example of that, because I was very curious about it.
Like an example of an actual,
like an artist who you would, who you would classify as, in that category.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh, there's so many. I think of Nicola Cruz. You listen to his music. He's from Ecuador, and he records a lot of live instruments. And even though it's electronic, when you listen to it, you can hear like the crunchiness of these of these instruments. You can hear the sort of the noise in them, and the sound of the rattles. And I think that there's a very there's a very textural feel where you can hear the humanness in it. That's the first example that comes to mind. Or also, there's a harpist named Mary Latimore. And I've been listening to a lot of harp music lately. Her and Nyla Hunter, who we performed with at the Ram Dass event, both of them create this really beautiful electronic music, but there's a harp that's front and center, and you can almost hear their fingers moving up and down it, and it turns into these beautiful ambient washes. But I think the organicness just comes down to hearing some piece of wood, metal, and someone's fingers resonating through it.
Yeah, wow, I really like that description. I'm not a musician at all. I mean, I love music and I consume it almost constantly. But I don't really have the vocabulary to describe what I like sometimes. But you also mentioned, in regard to sort of crafting or curating an emotional experience through music, especially with medicines like ayahuasca, I've heard it said that the music is the medicine, I personally can't imagine doing something like ayahuasca that isn't in a setting where there's live music being played. So, yeah, what do you think of sort of the music as part of the journey, as much of the journey as the substance itself that you're taking?
I would agree with that. And I'm biased, but for me, we're talking about psychedelics and spirituality, but it's really psychedelics and music and just whatever comes out of that. And I would say nature as well. I mean, some of my most transformative experiences have been out in nature, but when it comes to the lens of the sort of focused therapeutic use, I think of the music is the substrate. It's so powerful. Even when you're dead sober and you're listening to music, you can hear a song that takes you back to childhood or to a really good memory, to a really awful memory. You can have this distaste for something so fast that it's so coded into our DNA and to who we are, to our memory and their sense of joy, melancholy, all of these things. So music is it is also the gateway and the key, and all at the same time. So when creating these playlists or songs or albums, I think of this a lot because it's a really, really powerful technology. And anything that is powerful out of these states, when you go into these states, they can be extremely, extremely transformative when you have, just as much as when you have the right song at the right moment in during a psychedelic experience, or the wrong song at the wrong moment. It can be sort of transformative in both ways. I mean, I've had experiences where the song was so off for me that I've barely been able to sit up and get up and change the song, or something that was so beautiful that I thought, great, I'm going to dedicate my life doing this. This is it. Or I had a song come on accidentally. Are you a fan of Sigur Rós?
Yeah, I like them.
I had a song come on a playlist totally accidentally. I don't know how it happened. It just ended up on a psychedelic playlist during a session I was doing, and it was so haunting and so beautiful. And it was a song that I never would have actually intended to put on there, but it felt like this. When I'm listening to it in a state of sobriety, it's really beautiful. But when I was rehearing it, I do believe that you sometimes it feels like hearing a song for the first time. You haven't really experienced a song till you've heard it in this state, and you can hear an entirely new dimension of what the artist was going through or what was happening at the time, or listening to, for me, listening to Radiohead, Kid A, or parts of it in these states completely changed the way that I think about the depth of music, or the transformative power of a song to be able to take. I've had an experience of feeling awful and having a song come in, and the artists come in from a different timeline, feel like they pick me up and move me out of this trench and just drop me back in a nice place. I guess the power of music.
Yeah, that reminds me, and this is going to sound so silly, but I wonder how the concept transfers. In college, when I first discovered MDMA, which is still probably my favorite entheogen, I'll say. Some people debate whether or not it's a psychedelic. I would then, I would basically listen to the music that I would listen to under the influence of MDMA. I would listen to it sober and try to see if I could somehow remember the brain state that, like elicit that kind of similar brain state just by listening to the music. And I would do that for all different types of things, whether I was studying or hula hooping or whatever at times when I didn't have MDMA. But, I wonder if now, if someone, for instance, listens to a whole playlist of a journey minus the medicine, or listens to Icaros, or, whatever it is, without, the accompanying entheogen with it, like if you could still kind of go through that journey and have similar insights even, or an experience, I don't know. It's something that would be curious to me.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm really curious, have you gone back and listened to your old favorite MDMA albums and been able to have that feel the feel?
It's been a while. This is I'm going to completely embarrass myself here, but there were times in college where I realized how much I loved that experience. And when I was studying late at night and like really just wanted to like amp up my mental brain state, I would listen to this music because it reminded me of like being super awake and super engaged. When it was like 3 a.m. and I had a test the next day, and how was I going to make the experience feel better, essentially. And I think to an extent it worked. I don't know if it was a placebo or if it really was doing something that was, was what I was trying to accomplish. But I don't know. I haven't, for instance, I haven't taken like an ayahuasca playlist or anything like that and then just lied in my bed and listened to it, for 4 hours. It's, I do listen to that type of medicine music sometimes, but it doesn't really have the same effect when you're just driving around in your car. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have. I remember the first time I ever really had a full MDMA experience was listening to Portishead Dummy, and I can still put that album on. The first notes come in, and I get shivers because I remember that feeling of being like, where am I? What is happening? This is a whole new world. It was the most incredible feeling. I was with a group of friends. We were all just like chilling in this beautiful house, the carpet sitting there. And when that song came on, I thought, I mean, I can feel it right now. But to this day, I don't listen to that album all the time. I keep it for really special occasions. I don't just chuck it on when I'm making pasta or whatever. I leave it because it has this really deep meaning to me, and so I can 100% can go there. I also have, there's an album, the first time I smoked DMT, this abstract, very psychedelic, very strange album by this artist called Electric Birds, which is, it feels like, to me now, it feels like crystallized DMT, although the album's like not even on streaming services, but it's called Strata Frames by Electric Birds. You can sometimes find it on Bandcamp, but it's a great album. It works very well with that space in particular. And a friend of mine was like, I found the most perfect thing. Here you go. And also like memory is so impressionable, and DMT has this smell and this whole thing in the lungs, and this album come on. It's a very strange album. So I can like listen to that now. I'm also very imaginative when it comes to music. I spend, 5 hours a day, like in immersed in music in the space of imagination. So it's really easy for me to go there. But I can, if I'm walking around and I put that album on and I just sit there, I can almost get the kind of like the DMT 4D shapes thing to show up. I think it just brings back that memory, kind of like if you smell something and you're like, oh, it just reminds me of like my grandma's house, or like, so you can't really tell why that grandma house smell. It's kind of the same thing for me.
Yeah. I was just, as you were talking about that, I was thinking about some of the songs I listened to my very first time on psychedelics, on mushrooms, back when I was 18. And
what was that?
Do you know the song Metanoia by MGMT?
Oh, yeah.
I had a whole MGMT phase.
That's a great record.
Yeah. So that song really, I mean, it's also a pretty long song, and that song in and of itself, because of its length, almost really does have like a mini container for some kind of experience. Or I'm also thinking, even if, whether my like, MDMA like music attempts worked or failed, I was thinking that what does help me is, I grew up listening to Krishna Das. Just that was, my family, we were in the satsang. And so literally from the cradle, like Krishna Das was like always just the soundtrack to my childhood. And so to this day, like it doesn't matter where I am, whether it's traffic or working or trying to fall asleep or just hanging out with friends. Like if I hear Krishna Das, like it really does something to my nervous system and calms me down. So could you say that's psychedelic? I mean, it's like mind manifesting some sort of like childhood comfort, nostalgia thing. I mean, it's not even nostalgic almost, because it's still in the present day. Like I have a current relationship with his music as well. So
think of it like comfort food, right? Too, where there's just something that when you have this certain dish, you feel this sense of comfort. And like, what is comfort? You feel safe. And how, like we know in the world of psychedelics, like how valuable is the feeling of safety. I guess that's what set and setting is all about, right? Actually being safe, but feeling safe. The idea that you can just play this sound and all of a sudden your defenses go down, and you can open up to an experience. I think that's so powerful.
Yeah, that's like, I mean, KD is definitely on my psychedelic playlists, like especially if I were to be having a hard time, like I know that it's like, that's going to like be what is helpful. So is there anything else that I haven't asked you that you want to talk about or add or anything,
Yeah, absolutely. Part of this whole process, my ambient group Superposition, we've started a label called Formless. That's obviously inspired by this whole world. So the invitation that I have for artists, we have a bunch of artists that are going to be released next year in 2022. Really some of my favorite artists in the world, and we can't talk about it just yet, but it's really, I'm very happy about the way that this is all going with invitation, as I'm asking artists who've had psychedelic experience or who have not had psychedelic experiences, but like this meditation that you're making, this ambient song, make something for your own internal journey. And so everything on Formless on this label has been tested and is very much meant for psychedelic journey work. That's the intention, the very specific intention of this label. The series that's coming out is called Music for Inner Space. And it's very much focused on the meditation side of things. Like all of these pieces would be good in the very beginning of a session or after a session. I actually start my almost all of my psychedelic journeys with a guided meditation. That's where the whole, like these meditations that we've done with Ram Dass and Alan Watts and everything have come from that. So like if I'm doing a mushroom journey on my own, like I'll eat my dose and then I'll put on a 20-minute meditation to help guide me into it. And so that's the intention for this entire label. So if anyone's looking for that, I think that I'm very excited to have all of these out in the world.
Yeah, that's really exciting. And for people to kind of find, to access that, to find you, find what you're working on, like how can they reach you? How can they stay in touch? What's your social media, that type of thing?
You can find me everywhere at Boreta, Boreta. And if you want to look up the Formless label, you just go to Formless.World, or you can see us on Instagram, everywhere else at Formless.World.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. It was so fun to talk to you. And I encourage everyone to really look up Boreta's work, his playlist. We can put out also hopefully information about the playlist that you made for DoubleBlind, and everything else that you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you so much. This has been a pleasure. Hope to do it again sometime, Madison.